You ever seen a man laugh a little too early, like when he thought he'd already won the game before the final whistle? That was Officer Rick Simmons in courtroom 4B on a hot Monday morning, arms crossed, smug smile plastered across his face, eyes glued to the black woman sitting across the aisle in silence. He had arrested her 3 weeks ago, all swagger and superiority, dragging her out of her vehicle in front of her son like she was some low-life criminal. And now he was laughing under his breath in court because he thought this was just another routine day, another minority he could bully, another case closed. But what he didn't know, what no one in that courtroom knew, was that the woman he had humiliated, the one he'd falsely accused, the one who sat in silence as his lawyer condescended and talked down to her, was not who they thought she was. Her name was Amara Cole, and her story started long before that courtroom drama, long before the flashing blue lights in her rearview mirror. See, Amara wasn't just another single black mother trying to get through her day, she was a storm in disguise. A storm that had once worn power suits in D.C., a storm that had walked the halls of Ivy League schools, a storm that had traded in her high heels for sneakers the day she chose to protect her son from a world that didn't see her humanity. But Rick Simmons didn't care about that. All he saw was a black woman in a modest sedan, driving through a neighborhood he didn't think she belonged in. He claimed she fit the description, said her tags were suspicious, claimed she was resisting when she asked why she was being detained. Her 10-year-old son, Elijah, cried as he filmed the incident on a cracked iPhone. Simmons knocked the phone out of his hand, pushed Amara against the hood, cuffed her too tight, and smirked as he shoved her into the back of his squad car. "Another one for the system," he muttered. She spent 36 hours in holding. No charges filed, no rights read, no lawyer granted. Just silence. Just stares. Just a guard who called her girl, and threw her a dry sandwich. But when she was finally released, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even speak. She just walked out, holding Elijah's hand head high. And that silence, that calm? It wasn't weakness. It was precision. See, Amara didn't just want justice, she wanted change. And to get that, she had to play their game just long enough to flip the board. 3 weeks later, she stood in court representing herself. The court-appointed attorney had looked at her like she was already guilty, like she was lucky to be breathing. She declined his services. Everyone thought she was crazy. Simmons laughed openly during jury selection. "She thinks she's smart," he told his partner, "but I've seen this story before." Only he hadn't. Not this one. Not Amara's. Because behind her silence were years of experience, years of law school, and years of watching people like Simmons get away with things that should have ended careers. She had been a civil rights attorney before leaving it all behind to care for her dying mother. Life had knocked her down. But it hadn't taken her mind. And in that courtroom she wielded it like a blade. She questioned every detail of the stop. She requested body cam footage, and mysteriously, it was missing. She subpoenaed traffic cam data. She interviewed witnesses. She pulled up city policy. She moved with the elegance of someone who had once stood before the Supreme Court. And yet Simmons kept laughing. "This is a waste of time," he said, rolling his eyes as Amara presented her evidence. The judge, a portly man with a short temper, seemed irritated that the case was dragging on. "Miss Cole, if you don't get to your point," he began, but then paused as she calmly pulled out a flash drive. "This, Your Honor, is a time-stamped video from a Ring doorbell camera," she said. "It shows Officer Simmons pulling me from my vehicle without cause, using excessive force and striking my child's phone out of his hand. The owner of the camera lives across the street and kindly provided this after hearing my story." The judge raised an eyebrow. Simmons stopped laughing. The video played, and the courtroom gasped. There it was in full color. Simmons yanking open her car door, yelling at her, grabbing her wrist before she even had a chance to speak. Elijah's cries echoed through the room. Simmons striking the phone, throwing Amara against the hood, smiling. His lawyer fumbled for words, claiming it was out of context. But the damage was done. For the first time, Simmons looked nervous. Amara didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just stood there like stone. "Your Honor, I would also like to submit into evidence a second video," she said, her voice calm, composed. "This one shows what happened after I was taken into custody. The police station's lobby camera. The footage showed Elijah crying, begging for someone to tell him where his mom was. Simmons walking by him, laughing with another officer. "He'll get over it," Simmons said on tape. The courtroom fell silent. The judge's expression changed. Simmons' lawyer objected, but the judge waved it off. Overruled. That was the moment the tide turned. But Amara wasn't finished. "I have one final statement," she said. "But I'd like to approach the bench to deliver it, Your Honor." The judge looked at her, puzzled. "Why?" She reached into her folder, pulled out a worn business card and held it up. "Because I am also submitting a formal ethics complaint. Not just against Officer Simmons, but against this court's handling of this case. And as an active member of the State Bar, I am exercising my right to file that complaint in person. I believe you'll want to hear this next part privately." The room stirred. Murmurs spread. Simmons looked confused, then irritated, then pale. Amara calmly walked up the aisle, handed the bailiff her documents and waited. "And what exactly is your connection to the court?" the judge asked. And that's when she did it. That's when Amara reached into her satchel and pulled out a second ID badge. The courtroom leaned forward as she held it up, and that's when Simmons stood up, his face twisted in disbelief. Because the badge didn't just say, "Attorney." It said, "Federal Judicial Oversight Committee." The entire room froze. Simmons blinked, mouth open, but no sound came out. The judge's eyes narrowed. "You're with the..." And that's when Amara said it, loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. "Yes, Your Honor. And this court, and this officer, are now under federal review." Simmons stumbled back, panic rising in his eyes. But before anyone could speak again, before the gavel could drop, the back doors of the courtroom opened, and in walked two men in black suits with federal badges. One turned to Simmons and said, "Officer Rick Simmons, we need to speak with you immediately." But Simmons didn't move. His eyes flickered toward the door, then toward Amara. And then he ran. Right there in court, in full uniform, he bolted toward the emergency exit like a criminal fleeing a scene. Screams filled the courtroom. The two agents rushed after him. The judge stood, stunned. But Amara didn't flinch. She just turned, looked back at the stunned crowd and whispered, "Now you'll see." The courtroom was chaos. Gasps and cries echoed off the marble walls as Officer Rick Simmons, once so cocky and smug, now sprinted like a common fugitive in front of the very people he'd once intimidated. Chairs scraped. A bailiff shouted for order. But it was too late. He was already through the side door, gone like smoke in the wind. The federal agents who just arrived gave chase, weaving past stunned court officers, their badges flashing. But through all the noise and disorder, one person remained still, Amara Cole. She stood like an anchor, her expression unshaken, eyes fixed on the exit where Simmons had just vanished. Elijah, sitting quietly behind her, clutched his mother's bag and stared with wide, uncertain eyes. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice trembling. She turned to him slowly, her gaze softening. "It's okay, baby," she said. "This is just the beginning." The judge, still frozen in disbelief, finally banged his gavel. "Order. Order in this courtroom," he shouted, but the tension wouldn't leave. Not now. Not after what just happened. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law, it had become a battlefield of truth. "Your Honor," Amara said, stepping forward calmly, "with your permission I'd like to continue presenting my motion to dismiss, along with supporting evidence of systemic misconduct and civil rights violations." The judge swallowed hard, then slowly nodded. "Proceed." And so she did. With calm precision, Amara laid out documentation of prior complaints against Simmons, 12 in total, including 2 settlements that had been quietly buried. She showed data reports, citizen affidavits, statements from fellow officers too afraid to speak publicly. One document revealed that Simmons had used the phrase, "ghetto cleanup," in an internal email referring to a patrol in a predominantly black neighborhood. The judge's face drained of color. "This is damning," he muttered. "This entire department needs review." But Amara wasn't finished. "And Your Honor," she said, "I believe the court itself failed in its duty by not pursuing these allegations when the civil complaints were initially filed. I intend to file formal charges of institutional neglect and bias." The courtroom was silent again, this time in stunned respect. Amara had just flipped the system on its head. The people who dismissed her, who mocked her, now sat in quiet shame. But outside that courtroom, another storm was brewing. Rick Simmons hadn't gotten far. Surveillance caught him trying to duck through a rear hallway, out of uniform now, in a hoodie and jeans he'd stashed in a locker. He had a go bag in his car. He wasn't just fleeing the courthouse, he was disappearing. One of the agents who had pursued him, Special Agent DeMarco, radioed headquarters. Subject is attempting to flee jurisdiction, he said. Requesting immediate APB, likely headed southbound. Repeat, officer is now fugitive. Word spread quickly. News vans showed up outside the courthouse within the hour. Protesters gathered. Signs reading "Justice for Amara and Protect Black Mothers" waved through the air. Amara and Elijah were quietly escorted out the side entrance for safety, but the battle wasn't over. Not even close. That night, as she tucked Elijah into bed at her sister's house, he looked up at her and asked, "Is it really over?" She hesitated. "Not yet, sweetie. But we've cracked it open." She kissed his forehead. "We're not just fighting for us. We're fighting for every single person they thought would stay quiet." Meanwhile, across town, a shadow moved through an old garage. Simmons crouched by his duffel bag, counting cash, loading a weapon. His face was red with rage, humiliated, desperate. "She ruined everything," he muttered. "That which destroyed me." But deep down, even Rick Simmons knew the truth. Amara didn't destroy him. His own actions did. The mask had simply fallen. But pride and hatred are powerful poisons. And now this wasn't just about survival for him. It was about revenge. Back in the city, Amara met with a legal team from the Department of Justice. She provided them with everything: documents, contacts, names, backup drives. The federal case was growing faster than anyone anticipated. A formal inquiry into the city's police department was underway. But Simmons still hadn't been caught. "He'll resurface," one agent said. "Men like him always do. They can't stay hidden forever." The next day, Amara sat down for an exclusive interview on national television. The host, a sharp black journalist named Kyra Bell, asked the question everyone wanted to know. "Miss Cole, you were humiliated, falsely arrested, and your son was traumatized. And yet here you are, calm, collected, fearless. Where does that strength come from?" Amara took a breath. "It comes from the women before me," she said. "From Harriet to Rosa to my own mother. It comes from knowing that silence never saved us. I may have worn a maid's uniform to take care of my son these past few years, but I never stopped being who I am. And that's a fighter. A protector. A woman who's seen the inside of both jail cells and Harvard Law. And I'll never let them take my power again." The clip went viral. Millions shared it. Millions cheered. But one man watched it in a dingy motel room, fists clenched, breathing heavy. Simmons saw it on a cracked tablet, chewing his lip until it bled. He didn't just want to run anymore. He wanted to end her. He grabbed his gun. "You think this is over, Amara?" he growled. "You think you can humiliate me in front of the world and just go back to your life? Nah. You took everything from me. Now I'm taking it all back." That night, Amara was alone in the house. Her sister had taken Elijah out of town for safety while Amara wrapped up her legal filings. It was quiet. Too quiet. She sat by the window, laptop open, scanning files. A soft breeze blew through the curtains. And then, a sound. A creak. The back door. Her eyes narrowed. She stood slowly, instinct sharp. Years of courtroom pressure had taught her how to control fear. But this was different. She moved to the kitchen, grabbed her phone. No signal. The landline, cut. Her heart pounded now, adrenaline rushing. She heard another creak, closer. A shadow passed the hallway. She backed up toward the pantry and reached into the drawer where her sister kept a can of mace. Heavy footsteps now. The sound of breathing. "Come out, Amara," a voice whispered from the darkness. "We got unfinished business." Simmons. She knew it. The monster had come to finish what he started. But Amara wasn't the same woman he arrested in front of her son. She had already stood in front of the system and made it kneel. And now she would face this evil one-on-one. She clutched the mace, her back against the wall, her breath slow and steady. The shadow stepped into the kitchen doorway, gun raised. "End of the line," he whispered. And Amara stepped out from the shadows, calm, fierce, unblinking. But before either could speak, a deafening crash erupted behind Simmons. The front door exploded inward. Red and blue lights blinded the room. A voice roared through a megaphone, "Drop your weapon, Rick Simmons. FBI. You are surrounded." Simmons turned in panic, gun flailing, and in that split second, Amara launched forward, unleashing the mace straight into his eyes. He screamed, fired wildly, shattering a lamp. Agents burst through every entrance. He dropped to the floor, blinded and gasping, restrained in seconds. Amara stood over him, breathing hard, victorious. "You're done," she said coldly. "Forever." But just as agents began to clear the scene, one of them grabbed his radio, eyes wide. "We've got a bigger problem," he said. "Someone just hacked into the court's evidence system. Multiple files have been wiped, including all records of Simmons' complaints." Amara's heart dropped. "What do you mean wiped?" The agent looked at her grimly. "I mean, someone covered his tracks." He wasn't working alone. The air inside the safe house was tense, thick with questions no one wanted to answer yet. Amara sat across from Special Agent DeMarco, her brow furrowed as he replayed the moment his team discovered the breach in the federal evidence system. The digital logs were scrambled. Dozens of files, the very foundation of her case, were gone or corrupted. But the most disturbing part wasn't what was missing. It was what had been left behind, a signature line of code that read, "Judgment coming." Agent DeMarco tapped the table. This wasn't a rookie. This was surgical. And it means one thing: we're not just dealing with Simmons. We're dealing with a network. And someone high up wants this buried. Amara's stomach turned. Every step she'd taken, every ounce of justice she thought she'd claimed, now felt like it was standing on a cracked foundation. Elijah, safe in the next room, played quietly with blocks, unaware of how close danger still loomed over their heads. "So what now?" she asked. "We just let the truth disappear because some ghost in the system erased it?" DeMarco shook his head. "No. That's why we called in someone else. Someone who knows how to find things that were meant to stay hidden." Just then the door creaked open and a tall black woman in her early 30s stepped in, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, dreadlocks tied up in a scarf, sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Name's Jada Monroe," she said, flashing a badge. "Cybercrime Division. I used to run digital forensics for the Pentagon. Now I work on cases where the justice system gets messy." She smiled at Amara. "I've read everything you've done. You're the real deal." Amara nodded with a cautious smile. "We need to recover those files." "My whole case isn't gone," Jada cut in, flipping open her laptop and cracking her knuckles. "They deleted the top layers, but digital footprints go deep. Give me 24 hours. While Jada worked, Amara reached out to national media outlets to keep pressure on the case. She did interviews, podcasts, spoke at rallies. She wasn't just fighting for herself now, she was carrying the stories of others who'd been silenced by crooked cops, racist judges, and a system that only worked for those who wrote its rules. But something didn't sit right. The signature left behind, "Judgment coming," it wasn't just a threat. It was a message. One night, unable to sleep, Amara pored through old court records from Simmons' previous cases. Buried deep, she found something strange. 3 cases where charges were dropped without explanation. All against black men. All with the same prosecuting attorney, Stanley Holbrook. And in each case, Holbrook filed sealed motions minutes before the evidence disappeared. A chill ran through Amara's spine. Holbrook wasn't just covering for Simmons, he was the architect. Back in her Harvard days, Amara had written a thesis on institutional corruption in city courts. Holbrook's name had come up once, but he'd been protected then by a wall of influence. Now, he was district attorney. And that meant the man responsible for prosecuting Simmons was the very man who enabled him. "We've got a bigger war," she whispered to herself. "This wasn't about a bad cop. This is about a corrupted system, top to bottom." Meanwhile, across town in a gated estate, Holbrook stood at his office window sipping whiskey, staring out over the lights of the city he thought he owned. His assistant entered, pale-faced. "Sir, we have a problem. That woman, the one Simmons arrested, she's digging." Holbrook didn't flinch. "Then let her dig. She won't find anything unless I want her to." But he was wrong. Jada was closing in. After 18 hours straight, she cracked the first layer of encrypted files. Not only did she recover the erased footage from Amara's arrest, but she found confidential memos between Simmons and Holbrook, discussing tactics to neutralize community agitators. One file included surveillance footage of Simmons trailing Amara days before the arrest. "They were planning this long before it happened," Jada said, slamming her hand on the table. "They wanted to make her an example." "But why me?" Amara asked, shaken. Why not someone with more visibility? Jada looked her dead in the eye. Because you were invisible to them. That's what makes this system dangerous. It counts on you being quiet. And when you weren't, they panicked. With this new evidence, DeMarco called for an emergency grand jury review, but Holbrook moved fast. He filed a gag order under false pretenses, claiming national security risk. He's trying to bury it, DeMarco fumed. We need a judge who hasn't been bought. That's when Amara got an idea. She reached out to Judge Helena Miles, a retired federal judge known for her integrity, and for being the only black woman to ever sit on the state's Court of Appeals. Helena had stepped down quietly after a scandal involving political intimidation, but everyone knew the truth. She refused to bow. Miss Cole, Helena said as they met in a quiet church basement, you're putting a target on your back. Are you ready for that? Amara didn't hesitate. They've already drawn the target. I'm just choosing not to run from it. Helena agreed to help. With her guidance, Amara filed a judicial misconduct claim that would trigger a special federal review of Holbrook's record, bypassing his local control. It was risky. It would paint a bullseye on every move they made. But it was the only way to rip this rot out at its roots. As they filed the paperwork, the media storm reignited. News outlets called it the trial that could topple a city. Support poured in. Marches were held. Amara's name became a symbol of resilience. But power doesn't let go without a fight. One night, as Amara drove back from a legal strategy meeting, her brakes failed on the freeway. She swerved off the road, barely missing a semi. The car spun twice before slamming into a guardrail. Airbags deployed. Glass shattered. Her ears rang. When she crawled out, dazed and bloodied, she found the brake lines had been cut. An assassination attempt. This isn't a case anymore, DeMarco said, furious. It's a war. Amara spent the night in a secure hospital wing. Elijah wasn't allowed to visit. For the first time she cried, not out of fear but out of exhaustion. They want me dead, she whispered. Because they know if I live, I win. But she wasn't alone. Judge Helena issued a public statement, demanding oversight and emergency protections for whistleblowers. Jada released a redacted version of the files online, creating public outcry that couldn't be contained. Holbrook called a press conference to denounce the hysteria, but reporters turned on him mid-sentence, asking about Simmons, about the erased files, about the brake lines. And then came the tipping point. A whistleblower from inside the district attorney's office, a young black paralegal named Marcus, came forward with a flash drive. He handed it directly to Amara during a live-streamed rally. This has everything, he said into the mic, every payment, every bribe, every cover-up. Holbrook isn't just corrupt. He's been running a ring of planted evidence and falsified arrests for over a decade. The crowd exploded. Holbrook's empire cracked wide open. But as Amara held the flash drive in her hands, Marcus leaned in close and whispered something that sent ice down her spine. You're not the only one they targeted. Simmons, he wasn't acting on orders from Holbrook alone. There's someone else. Someone in Washington. Someone bigger. That night, Amara sat alone in her temporary apartment, staring at the drive. It felt heavy in her hands, like the truth always does. She plugged it in. File after file appeared. Confidential memos. Hidden bank accounts. Photos of meetings with powerful names. And then a video file. Titled, Project Recourse, Confidential. She clicked it. The screen went black. Then a grainy video began to play. A boardroom. Holbrook. Simmons. A man she didn't recognize, tall, white, military haircut, sitting at the head of the table. His face turned to the camera. Amara's heart nearly stopped. She recognized him. Not from TV. Not from newspapers. But from a photograph her father once showed her. A man he'd worked under briefly while clerking in D.C. That man, her father had said, was the most dangerous kind. He smiled while pulling the strings. The man in the video leaned forward. This is how we keep order, he said coldly. We let the public believe they have a voice. But we choose who speaks. The video cut out. The screen went dark. The door behind Amara creaked. She turned slowly, heart pounding, and saw Elijah standing there rubbing his eyes. Mommy, he said, there's a man downstairs. He said he wants to talk to you. She rushed to the window. A black SUV sat idling across the street. A tall man in a dark coat stepped out, sunglasses gleaming even at night. She didn't recognize him, but something told her he wasn't from around here. Her phone buzzed. One text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or the boy is next." Amara's blood turned to ice as she read the text again. "Stop digging or the boy is next." She rushed over and pulled Elijah into her arms, holding him close as her heart thundered in her chest. She didn't have time to think, only act. She grabbed her go-bag from the closet, yanked open the panic panel Jada had installed behind the bookshelf, and triggered the emergency signal, a silent beacon to Agent DeMarco that they were compromised. Moments later, tires screeched outside. But it wasn't DeMarco. She peeked through the blinds. The man from the SUV now stood directly across the street, talking into an earpiece. A second vehicle, a sleek black van, rolled up behind him. She backed away, clutching Elijah tighter. "We have to move. Now." Within seconds, Jada burst through the front door from the back alley, laptop in one hand, a Glock in the other. "We've been made," she said between breaths. "I wiped the local network, but they must have tracked your phone." The text, "They threatened Elijah," Amara said, her voice cracking. Jada's face went hard. "Then we're burning this location. Come on." They slipped out the rear exit into a narrow service alley where an unmarked sedan idled, DeMarco at the wheel, eyes scanning everything. "They moved faster than we thought," he growled. "And that means only one thing. Someone in the DOJ flagged your name when that video started circulating." As they drove off, Amara stared out the window. She wasn't just fighting local corruption anymore. This was federal. And she was now a target of the very justice system she once tried to serve. They drove 2 hours to an undisclosed safe house in the countryside, an off-the-grid cabin wired with satellite comms and independent power. As night fell, Jada decrypted the rest of the flash drive Marcus had given them. What they uncovered was horrifying. Project Recourse, it turned out, was a clandestine initiative buried inside a Homeland Security budget report. Its stated mission? To identify and monitor potential civic disruptors under the guise of public safety. But the actual files told a darker story. The program had enabled targeted arrests of activists, mostly black and brown, for years, feeding them into a justice pipeline controlled by complicit DAs like Holbrook and officers like Simmons. "They've been running a domestic suppression campaign," Jada said, her voice shaking with rage. "And you, Amara, you weren't just random. You were flagged 3 years ago. After your first legal aid campaign went viral." Amara stared at the screen. Her name, photo, and digital dossier were on full display, filed under the category, Soft Threat, Escalating Influence. "This is why they came after me," she whispered. "Not because I broke the law, but because I threatened the lie they built everything on." DeMarco ran his hands through his hair. "This goes way beyond Holbrook. We're talking elected officials, corporate sponsors, judges, law enforcement, all connected." The weight of it all nearly crushed her. But she refused to break. "We leak it. All of it. Names, files, video. They wanted to silence me, but now I have the mic." "Too dangerous," DeMarco said. "We need a protected channel. Someone who can take this and run without compromising your safety, or Elijah's." Jada nodded slowly. "I know someone. They run an anonymous truth network. But once this hits, there's no going back. They'll come for us harder." Amara met her eyes. "They're already coming. Let them." While Jada began the data transfer, Amara sat with Elijah by the fireplace. She watched the fire flicker in his eyes and promised herself she would never let him grow up in a world where the truth was optional. But even as she whispered words of comfort, miles away in D.C., the storm was already brewing. Inside a sleek marble office overlooking Capitol Hill, the man from the SUV, now revealed to be Special Advisor Curtis Langston, watched a security feed of Amara's escape. A junior agent entered nervously. "Sir, the Cole files are going public. We've identified the whistleblower as a Marcus Bell." Langston didn't look away from the screen. "Neutralize Bell. And issue the order for Cole." "Sir?" "Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. No survivors." Back at the cabin, Jada hit send on the final file batch, routing it through 6 international proxies and dumping it on every major journalist and human rights platform. Within minutes, Twitter exploded. #Project Recourse began trending globally. News stations interrupted regular programming to broadcast snippets of the leaked video. Politicians scrambled. DOJ officials denied knowledge. But the flood had started. Amara's story was now everyone's story. For a brief moment, it felt like the tide was turning. Then came the gunfire. Bullets ripped through the cabin's walls, sending wood chips flying. Elijah screamed. DeMarco tackled Amara to the ground while Jada returned fire from the window. "Move. Now." DeMarco shouted. They crawled toward the underground escape hatch Jada had built beneath the cabin floor. Amara shielded Elijah with her body, heart racing. "They found us," she cried. "They found us." DeMarco opened the hatch and dropped down first. "Pass him to me." Amara handed Elijah down, then followed with Jada covering them. She barely made it before an explosion rocked the cabin above, flames engulfing the roof. The three of them ran through the narrow tunnel to a hidden exit in the woods, coughing from smoke and debris. When they emerged, headlights beamed down the tree line. "Not friendlies. Split up," Jada said. "They can't catch all of us." She handed Amara a burner phone. "If I don't make it, get to the drop zone. Latitudes preloaded." "You're coming too, Gio?" Jada yelled, disappearing into the trees. Amara and DeMarco ran, clutching Elijah, pushing through thorns and branches until they reached an old utility road. A pickup truck pulled up just as the first drone buzzed overhead. It was Marcus, bloodied but alive. "Get in," he shouted. They climbed in and the truck roared down the road, dodging enemy surveillance. But just as they rounded the bend, a wall of black SUVs blocked the path ahead. Armed agents swarmed in full gear. They were trapped. DeMarco reached for his weapon. "If it's a standoff they want..." "No," Amara said, eyes locked on Elijah. "We don't die here. Not like this." She stepped out slowly, hands raised, shielding her son. "You want me?" she shouted. "Fine. But let the boy go. He's just a child." One of the agents stepped forward, lowering his gun. He looked conflicted, his mouth opening as if to say something, until a shot rang out. The agent dropped. Chaos erupted. Another explosion behind them. The SUVs scattered. Suddenly, black helicopters appeared above. But this wasn't the government. It was something else. A rogue resistance group, faces masked, gear patched with the word truth, scrawled in white paint, descended from the trees and laid down suppressing fire. "We're Extraction," one of them yelled. "Amara Cole, we've been watching. You just lit the fuse. Now let's finish this." Amara, stunned, clutched Elijah as they were ushered into a waiting vehicle. Marcus climbed in beside them, bleeding from a fresh wound. "You still think this is just about you?" he asked, eyes burning. "You just exposed the biggest domestic scandal in modern U.S. history. There are people in power who will never stop coming." The vehicle sped away, dirt and leaves flying as helicopters hovered above. Amara turned to the masked soldier beside her. "Who are you people?" The woman pulled down her mask, revealing a familiar face. It was Judge Helena Miles. Alive. Fierce. Eyes filled with fire. The courts failed. The law failed. So now, we become the storm. But just as Amara began to breathe again, her phone buzzed. A single text from her old college friend, now an investigative reporter at the Washington Herald. "Amara, there's something you don't know. The man from the video? Curtis Langston? He's not just an advisor. He's your biological uncle. Your mother knew. He funded your education. He's been watching you since you were 15. Amara stared at the text in stunned silence, her breath catching as the world around her seemed to fade into a deafening stillness. "Curtis Langston is your biological uncle." The message echoed in her mind like a cruel whisper from the past. She looked down at Elijah, still asleep in her arms, and then across the armored transport where Judge Helena Miles was briefing the underground team on their next move. Amara's thoughts spiraled back. Those anonymous scholarships, the early recommendation letters, the unseen hand that always seemed to help her climb. She'd believed it was destiny or karma. Now she knew it was surveillance. Manipulation. Her education, her entire journey, might have been orchestrated by the same man now trying to kill her. "He was always watching me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus, who sat across from her with his shoulder bandaged and blood drying on his collar, leaned forward. "Langston didn't just build Project Recourse. He invented it. His mission wasn't just about suppressing activism, it was about controlling the narrative. You were his wild card, Amara. The variable he couldn't predict. And now, You're his biggest threat. Judge Miles nodded gravely. Langston believes in control above all else. Even his own bloodline wasn't off limits. He funded you so he could keep you close. When he lost that control, he turned on you. DeMarco turned in his seat. We've got one shot. The files you released were just the beginning. There's a final document, something Marcus hinted at when he first handed you that flash drive. The insurance policy. A record of all the high-level names attached to Project Recourse. Supreme Court justices, cabinet members, billionaires, media executives. Langston buried it deep, air-gapped servers, off-grid storage. But now we know where it is. Jada pulled up a satellite map on her tablet. Langston owns a private estate in Virginia, disguised as a vineyard. But underneath it is a bunker, his personal archive. We get in there, we blow this whole machine apart. Amara nodded slowly, steel returning to her spine. Then we go there. Tonight. The plan was suicide, an assault on a fortified estate crawling with private security, surveillance drones and Langston's own Black Ops force. But Amara no longer feared death. She feared letting this monster remain in the shadows, poisoning justice from within. That night, under the cover of a thunderstorm, they approached the estate. Marcus and Jada infiltrated the perimeter using a drainage tunnel. Judge Miles coordinated from a mobile command unit while DeMarco and Amara, dressed as vineyard workers, slipped past the front gate with Elijah hidden in a decoy-produced crate driven by a trusted ally. The plan unfolded with military precision, until it didn't. A laser tripwire in the wine cellar triggered the alarm. Floodlights burst to life, and the estate became a war zone. Gunfire erupted from hidden towers. Jada was hit in the leg. Marcus dragged her to safety behind a wall of oak barrels. Go! Jada screamed. Get the files. Amara, heart pounding, ran through the chaos, dodging bullets and ducking into the elevator leading to the underground bunker. DeMarco joined her just in time, returning fire as the doors closed. If we don't make it, he started. We will, she said. We have to. The elevator descended into darkness. When the doors opened, they found themselves in a sleek, sterile corridor lit by fluorescent lights. Security cameras followed their every move. At the end of the hall stood a titanium door with a biometric scanner. Amara hesitated, then placed her hand on the pad. The system scanned her palm, then flashed green. Access granted. DeMarco looked at her. Why would your print? Because I'm family, she said bitterly. The door opened. Inside was a room filled with servers, screens, and a single figure seated in a leather chair, back turned. Slowly he stood. Curtis Langston. Impeccably dressed. Cold, calculating eyes. Amara, he said, voice calm. You've caused quite the mess. She stepped forward. You tried to kill me. No, he said, I tried to protect you. But you forced my hand. This isn't about you. It never was. It's about order. Stability. You think exposing this data will free people? It will destroy what little structure we have left. You built that structure on racism, oppression, and lies, she snapped. And I'm burning it down. Langston sighed. Do you even know what will happen if you release those files? Riots. Panic. Collapsed markets. And Elijah? He'll grow up in a war zone. He'll grow up free, she said. Not monitored. Not owned. You're emotional, Langston said. Predictable. Like your mother. The words hit like a slap. You knew her? She was my sister, he said quietly. And she begged me to keep you out of this world. But you couldn't help yourself. You had to be the hero. No, Amara said, stepping toward the central console. I had to be the truth. Langston reached for a gun hidden beneath the desk. But DeMarco was faster. A single shot rang out. Langston fell to the floor, gasping. You think this ends with me? He wheezed. There are others. I'm just the first head of the Hydra. Amara didn't answer. She inserted the master key into the server, decrypted the final drive, and uploaded the files to every major media outlet, every government watchdog, every civil rights lawyer she'd ever worked with. The truth poured out like a flood. Names, receipts, orders, everything. It was done. As sirens wailed in the distance, real ones this time, Amara stood over Langston's dying body. I'm not your pawn, she said. I'm the reckoning. Minutes later, federal agents stormed the estate, tipped off by DeMarco. Amara surrendered peacefully. She wanted the world to see her in cuffs, so they could witness what the system does to those who challenge it. But this time the people didn't turn away. Videos of her arrest went viral. Protesters flooded the streets demanding her release. News anchors called her a whistleblower. Congress launched emergency hearings. Judge Helena Miles came out of hiding to testify, supported by an army of newly emboldened judges. Project Recourse was dismantled. Dozens of officials resigned. Some were indicted. Simmons and Holbrook? Convicted on multiple counts. The justice system began a slow, painful transformation. And Amara? She stood trial not as a criminal, but as a truth-teller. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Outside, thousands chanted her name. She walked out of the courthouse with Elijah in her arms and DeMarco by her side, free for the first time in her life, not just legally but spiritually. Weeks later, Amara testified before Congress. Her words echoed across the nation. Justice is not a building. It is not a badge. It is not a robe. Justice is truth in motion. And as long as we keep moving, no system, no lie, and no man can stop it. The clip went viral, seen by millions. She founded the Elijah Foundation, a legal and educational initiative named after her son, dedicated to dismantling systemic injustice from the ground up. Jada, fully recovered, ran the tech side. Marcus became her policy director. Judge Miles joined the board. And DeMarco? He became more than just protection. He became family. The story of Amara Cole, the black woman laughed at in court, chased through the shadows, nearly erased by her own blood, became legend. But more importantly, it became a warning to anyone who thought truth could be silenced. One evening, as the sun set over D.C., Elijah stood beside his mother on the steps of the Supreme Court. "You were really brave, Mommy," he said. She smiled, brushing his curls back. "I was scared, baby. But I did it anyway. That's what courage is." "Are the bad guys all gone?" "Some," she said. "But others are hiding. Waiting. What happens if they come back?" Amara looked out over the Capitol, its dome glowing in twilight. "Then we rise again. Stronger. Louder. Together." And with that, the story ended not with vengeance or fear, but with hope. A new beginning. A nation reawakened. And a mother and son, hand in hand, walking boldly into a future they helped reclaim. The end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths.